The afternoon sun spilled golden light across the busy streets, casting long shadows that made the jewelry shop sparkle even more brightly. The glass windows reflected beams of light from dozens of necklaces, bracelets, and diamond rings neatly arranged inside. For most people passing by, it was just another shop on the corner of the city square, but for one young boy, it was a place filled with dreams. His name was Jordan. He was only 14, tall for his age, but still with the innocent face of a teenager who hadn't yet experienced the full weight of the world. He had saved his money for months. Every weekend he mowed lawns, washed cars, and delivered groceries for neighbors who trusted him. He kept every dollar carefully folded inside an old shoebox under his bed. He never touched it for candy, for video games, or even for school trips. Jordan had only one purpose in mind: to buy his mother something special for her upcoming birthday. His mother was a nurse who worked double shifts at the hospital. Most days she came home tired but still smiling, telling Jordan and his younger sister stories about the patients she helped. She never complained, but Jordan noticed the wrinkles forming at the edges of her eyes and the way her hands ached after long nights. She had given him everything she could, even when times were difficult. For once, he wanted to give something back. He wanted to surprise her with a gift that would remind her of how loved she was. So on this bright afternoon, Jordan finally pushed open the glass door of the jewelry store, his savings tucked neatly in his pocket. The bell above the door chimed, softly. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polish and velvet, and the glass cases gleamed with treasures that seemed almost untouchable. Jordan's eyes widened as he walked slowly past the displays. He wasn't there to cause trouble. He wasn't even nervous, though the shop was filled with shiny objects worth more than anything he had ever owned. Instead, he felt proud. Proud that he had worked hard. Proud that he had saved. Proud that he was finally here. But not everyone in the store saw it that way. Near the counter, a woman in a crisp white blazer stood examining a diamond bracelet. She was well-dressed, with perfect makeup and hair pinned neatly. In her mind, a store like this belonged to people like her, people who she believed looked wealthy, confident, and respectable. When her eyes caught sight of Jordan, her brows furrowed almost instantly. She didn't see a hard-working boy with a heart full of love for his mother. She saw only what her assumptions whispered: a teenager who didn't belong. The woman's expression hardened. She leaned slightly away from Jordan, clutching her handbag as though the boy might snatch it. Jordan noticed her stare, but he tried to ignore it. He walked up to a display case where a delicate silver necklace caught his eye. It had a small heart pendant in the middle, simple, yet beautiful. Just the kind of thing his mother would treasure. He leaned closer to look at the price tag, quietly calculating whether the money in his pocket would be enough. The store clerk, a kind middle-aged man in glasses, stepped forward politely. "Would you like to take a closer look at that necklace?" the clerk asked. Jordan smiled shyly. "Yes, please. It's for my mom's birthday." The clerk nodded warmly and pulled out the necklace, laying it on a soft black velvet tray. Jordan's eyes sparkled with excitement, but before he could say another word, the woman in the white blazer cleared her throat loudly, her eyes locked on the boy. "Excuse me," she said sharply to the clerk. "Are you really going to let him touch that? Do you know how much it costs?" Jordan froze. His smile faded and he glanced nervously at the woman. The clerk looked uncomfortable but tried to remain polite. "He's just looking, ma'am. It's quite all right." But the woman wasn't convinced. She shook her head and pulled her phone from her purse. "This doesn't feel right. I've seen kids like this before. They come in pretending to buy something, and the next thing you know, something goes missing." Jordan's heart pounded. He wanted to speak, to explain that he had worked hard for this, that he wasn't there to steal. But the words caught in his throat. He felt small under the woman's piercing gaze. She pressed a button on her phone and held it to her ear. "Yes, I'd like to report suspicious activity," she said into the receiver. Her voice was loud enough for everyone in the store to hear. "There's a boy here who clearly doesn't belong. Please send someone quickly." The clerk tried to intervene. "Ma'am, that really isn't necessary." But she ignored him. walking a few steps away as she continued speaking on the phone. Jordan stood frozen by the counter, the necklace glimmering on the tray before him. His hands trembled slightly. He had done nothing wrong, yet suddenly he was being treated like a criminal. His mind spun with confusion and hurt. Was it his age? His clothes? Or was it something deeper? Something he had no control over? The bell above the door chimed again, and 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside. Their presence filled the shop with tension. Customers turned their heads, whispering among themselves. The woman quickly waved them over, her voice firm and certain. "Officers, there he is," she said, pointing directly at Jordan. "That's the boy. I'm telling you, he's up to something." Jordan's stomach twisted. He looked at the officers, then at the clerk, then back at the necklace. He wanted to explain, to shout that he was only there to buy a gift for his mom, but fear held his words back. The officers approached slowly, their faces calm but serious. One of them asked Jordan, "Son, what are you doing here today?" Jordan swallowed hard. He tried to steady his voice. I just wanted to buy this necklace. It's for my mom's birthday. I saved up for it." The officer raised an eyebrow, glancing at the necklace and then at the woman who had called. The woman crossed her arms, confident she had done the right thing. "He's lying," she insisted. "You can't let him fool you. Just look at him." The room fell silent. The clerk looked upset, the customers uneasy, and Jordan stood trembling, wishing his father were there. His father always told him, "Son, no matter what, stay calm. Speak with respect. The truth will always stand." And so Jordan took a deep breath, his voice trembling but clear. "If you don't believe me, you can call my dad." The officers exchanged a look. The woman smirked, already picturing what kind of man would show up. She expected someone ordinary, someone who wouldn't defend the boy with much authority. She had no idea what was about to happen, because the man who would walk through those doors soon was not ordinary. He was a leader, a protector, and a decorated Navy SEAL chief, and his arrival would change everything. The jewelry shop had fallen into a strange kind of silence, the kind where everyone could feel the weight of tension in the air, but no one wanted to be the first to break it. Jordan stood frozen near the glass case, his eyes drifting back and forth between the necklace he had hoped to buy and the 2 police officers now standing just a few feet away from him. For a boy who had done nothing wrong, the sudden shift in the atmosphere felt like a heavy storm rolling in out of nowhere. His throat tightened, his palms felt sweaty, and his heart thumped louder than the ticking of the wall clock above the counter. The woman in the white blazer looked almost triumphant, as if she had single-handedly prevented a great disaster. She kept her chin high and arms crossed, her posture screaming with confidence that she had done the right thing. But her eyes stayed locked on Jordan, cold and suspicious, as if daring him to prove otherwise. She had convinced herself that she had read the situation correctly, that this young boy could only be here for one reason, to take something he did not earn. She didn't notice the way his shoes were scuffed from all those afternoons cutting grass for neighbors. She didn't see the rough marks on his hands from carrying grocery bags or washing cars. She didn't know about the shoebox under his bed filled with small crumpled bills that represented hours of honest work. All she saw was a boy who, in her mind, didn't belong. Jordan glanced at the officers, trying to steady himself. He remembered what his dad always told him, that when faced with unfairness, he should never let anger control him. His dad's voice echoed in his memory, calm but firm. Respect earns respect. Even when the world doubts you, stand tall. So he lifted his chin a little, though his voice still trembled when he spoke. "I came here for a necklace. It's for my mom. Her birthday is next week." The officer closest to him tilted his head, studying the boy's expression. His tone wasn't harsh, but it carried authority. "Do you have money for it, son?" Jordan nodded quickly and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a folded envelope filled with bills, some crisp, some worn, the edges softened from being counted so many times. He held it out with shaking hands. "I saved it all myself, every dollar." The clerk, who had been silent out of respect for the officers, finally spoke up, his voice carrying quiet urgency. "He's telling the truth. He came straight to the necklace and asked politely, "I've been in this business for years. I can tell when someone's planning mischief. This boy isn't one of them." The woman let out a disbelieving laugh, shaking her head. "You're all being naive. Look at him. Do you really think he belongs in a place like this? Kids like him don't just walk in and buy jewelry. They come in to case the place, to see what they can get away with." Her words stung Jordan more than anything. Not because she was loud, but because of how certain she sounded, as if his hard work, his honesty, and his good intentions meant nothing at all. He clenched his fists at his sides, but said nothing, afraid that anger would only make things worse. He glanced at the necklace again, that tiny silver heart glowing under the shop lights, a symbol of love for his mother. It seemed further away now, like a dream slipping through his fingers. The second officer, who had remained quiet until now, stepped closer to Jordan and spoke in a softer voice. "Son, do you want us to call your parents just to clear this up?" Jordan nodded. His voice was small but steady. "Yes, please. Call my dad." The woman smirked again, certain that her instincts would be proven right. She imagined a man, showing up embarrassed, maybe apologizing for his son's behavior. She pictured someone ordinary, someone who wouldn't challenge her assumptions. The thought comforted her, reinforcing the wall of prejudice she had built inside her mind. The officer pulled out his radio and made a quick call. Jordan exhaled slowly, relief mixing with fear. He didn't know how long it would take, but he knew his dad would come. And when his dad arrived, everything would be different. His dad was the kind of man who never raised his voice but could silence a room with his presence alone. His dad had always told him, "Truth doesn't need to shout. It stands on its own." As they waited, the shop filled with a low hum of whispers. Customers exchanged uneasy glances. Some of them looked at the woman with raised eyebrows, clearly uncomfortable with how certain she was of the boy's guilt. Others looked at Jordan with pity, their hearts aching for a child who was being judged unfairly in front of so many. Jordan stood still, trying to stay calm, but inside his chest, his emotions swirled like a storm. He thought of his mom and how excited he had been to surprise her. He thought of all those long weekends of work, the hot sun beating down on his back, the blisters on his hands, the tired smiles of neighbors thanking him. All of it suddenly felt invisible, erased by one woman's snap judgment. The clerk, sensing the boy's struggle, gently placed a hand on the counter near the necklace. "Don't worry, son," he said softly. "Sometimes people see what they want to see, not what's real. Just hold on." Jordan swallowed hard, nodding faintly. The words gave him a small anchor, something to cling to in the storm. Minutes passed like hours. The woman checked her watch impatiently, clearly expecting this matter to be settled in her favor. The officers remained neutral, but their eyes kept drifting to the boy, perhaps noticing how different his demeanor was from the troublemakers they usually encountered. He wasn't loud. He wasn't defensive. He was simply waiting. And then, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from outside. The glass door swung open with a soft chime, and in walked a man whose presence seemed to change the air itself. His posture was straight, his movements controlled, his eyes sharp but calm. He wasn't in uniform, but the way he carried himself radiated discipline, strength, and authority. Jordan's face lit up. "Dad." The woman's confident smirk faltered. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected a man whose very presence commanded respect, a man who seemed like he had walked out of a world far larger than hers. She didn't yet know who he was, but the sight of him made her uneasy. The officers straightened instinctively, their eyes widening as the man pulled a badge from his pocket. The room seemed to grow smaller, the silence heavier, as the reality of who had just entered began to sink in. The Navy SEAL chief had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. Breaking moment. The glass door closed behind him. It felt as if the entire jewelry shop shifted its weight. People who had been whispering quietly stopped mid-sentence. The two officers instinctively straightened their posture, as though an invisible order had passed through them. Jordan's shoulders, tense and tight only a few minutes earlier, finally loosened when he saw his father's familiar figure step into the room. His dad wasn't just anyone. His dad was Chief Marcus Hayes, a man whose presence carried years of discipline, courage, and service, though to Jordan, he was simply Dad. The man who stayed up late to help him with homework, the man who grilled burgers on summer nights, and the man who reminded him to always choose dignity over anger. Marcus wasn't in uniform, but he didn't need one to command respect. He wore a plain green t-shirt tucked into camouflage pants, a black tactical vest fitted snug across his chest, and a mask that he slowly removed as he entered, revealing the calm, sharp eyes of a man who had seen more than most people could imagine. His boots were heavy against the tiled floor, but his voice was measured and steady when he spoke. "Jordan," he said simply, his tone both protective and gentle. "Dad," Jordan breathed out, his voice carrying both relief and emotion. In that instant, the boy felt safe again, as if a wall had risen between him and the storm that had nearly swallowed him whole. Marcus looked at his son for only a second before shifting his gaze to the officers. He didn't need to raise his voice. His calm confidence was enough. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, his words steady, controlled, but with a subtle edge that carried the weight of his authority. The woman in the white blazer was quick to step forward. She jabbed her finger toward Jordan, her expression still filled with misplaced certainty. "This is the problem," she said loudly. "That boy came in here pretending to shop, but I knew something was wrong. He was acting suspicious. I called you officers because I wasn't about to let something get stolen on my watch." Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't even turn his head toward her at first. His eyes remained on the officers, waiting for their explanation. One of them cleared his throat awkwardly. "Sir, we got a call about possible suspicious behavior. The boy said he was here to buy a necklace for his mother, and he did show us cash he had saved." Finally, Marcus shifted his gaze toward the woman. His stare wasn't harsh or angry, but it was steady enough to make her shift uncomfortably. "You thought my son was suspicious?" he asked quietly, his voice cutting through the air with more force than if he had shouted. The woman hesitated for the first time since she had picked up her phone. Her confidence wavered under his steady eyes, but pride wouldn't let her back down just yet. "Well, yes," she said. "Look at him. Do you really expect me to believe a boy like that could walk in here with money to buy jewelry?" Jordan felt the sting again. But this time he wasn't alone in carrying it. His father stepped closer, his tall figure casting a shadow over the situation. "That boy," Marcus said firmly, pointing at Jordan, "is my son. And everything he has, he earned with hard work. Every dollar in that envelope is proof of his character. So let me make something very clear. There is nothing suspicious about honesty, discipline, and respect." The clerk behind the counter nodded quickly, relief spreading across his face. "That's exactly what I tried to say." He came straight in, asked politely, and showed nothing but respect. I knew he was genuine. The officers glanced at each other, both men clearly recognizing Marcus. One of them leaned closer and spoke softly, almost with reverence. "Chief Hayes, we didn't realize." "Sir, of course we'll step back. It's clear the boy's intentions were good." The mention of his name seemed to ripple through the room. Some of the bystanders gasped softly, whispers starting again. "He's a Navy SEAL chief?" someone murmured. "I've read about him." The woman's mouth fell open slightly, her earlier smirk now gone. She hadn't expected this. She had pictured a man embarrassed, apologizing for his son, maybe fumbling with excuses. Instead, standing in front of her was a decorated Navy SEAL chief, a man who had risked his life countless times for his country, a man who radiated strength and integrity. She suddenly felt very small, her assumptions unraveling faster than she could gather them. Marcus took a slow step toward her, not menacing but deliberate. His voice was steady, his tone carrying both power and disappointment. "Do you know what's dangerous about assumptions?" he asked. "They make you see what isn't there and blind you to the truth that is right in front of you. My son isn't suspicious. He's a young man who wanted to surprise his mother with a gift he saved for months to buy. And yet, here he stands, treated like a criminal because you couldn't see past your own prejudice. The woman opened her mouth, then closed it again. Words failed her for the first time. She looked around the shop, hoping for support, but all she saw were faces filled with disapproval. Even the officers' eyes had softened, their earlier seriousness now replaced with sympathy for the boy and quiet respect for his father. Jordan stood beside his dad, his chest rising with a mix of pride and relief. He had always admired his father's strength, but this wasn't about muscles or medals. This was about something greater, the ability to stand firm in truth without losing calmness, the power to defend without destroying, the strength to turn a moment of judgment into a lesson. The silence in the room deepened until Marcus finally stepped back, his hand resting gently on his son's shoulder. "Son," he said softly, "you did the right thing. You stayed calm. You told the truth. That's what matters." Jordan looked up at him, his eyes shining. "I remembered what you always say, Dad. That respect is stronger than anger." Marcus gave him a small nod, his expression proud. "Exactly." The officers cleared their throats. One of them addressed Marcus with respect. "Chief, will file this as a misunderstanding and step out. There's no issue here." They tipped their hats slightly, acknowledging both Marcus and Jordan, before quietly exiting the shop. The woman in white stood frozen, her confidence fully drained. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but every word she considered sounded hollow in her own mind. The truth was undeniable. She had misjudged. She had been wrong. Marcus turned back to his son, ignoring the woman entirely now. He pointed at the necklace on the velvet tray. "Let's finish what you came here to do, son." Jordan's smile returned slowly, hesitant at first, then growing wider as the clerk carefully placed the silver heart necklace into a small box. Jordan handed over his envelope of savings with pride, and the clerk wrapped the box neatly before sliding it across the counter. Jordan picked it up carefully, holding it as though it were the most valuable treasure in the world. For him, it wasn't just jewelry. It was love. It was gratitude. It was proof that he could achieve something through effort and patience no matter what anyone else assumed. The woman lowered her eyes, shame coloring her face, but neither Jordan nor his father spared her another glance. They had already risen above the moment, proving that respect, dignity, and truth were stronger than judgment and assumption. As they walked toward the door together, Marcus placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder. The bell chimed again as the door opened, letting in fresh air and sunlight. Jordan clutched the box tightly, feeling lighter than he had when he walked in. He wasn't just carrying a gift for his mother. He was carrying a lesson, one that would stay with him forever. The shop slowly returned to normal after they left, but no one forgot what they had just witnessed. Customers whispered about the strength of the boy, the calm authority of the father, and the way one moment had revealed so much about judgment, respect, and truth. The woman in the white blazer left quietly, her earlier pride replaced with silence, carrying with her a lesson she hadn't wanted but one she desperately needed. And Jordan, walking beside his father in the afternoon sun, knew deep down that this day would forever shape the way he carried himself in the world. Because sometimes the greatest battles weren't fought on distant fields or in dangerous missions. Sometimes they were fought in everyday places, like a jewelry shop, with nothing but truth, respect, and the courage to stand tall. The door of the jewelry shop had barely closed behind Marcus when the energy inside shifted completely. He did not come in with anger or noise. He came in with the kind of presence that made people pause without even knowing why. Years of discipline had shaped his posture. Years of service had hardened his eyes yet softened his heart. And every step he took carried the weight of someone who had led men through storms most people would never even imagine. To Jordan, however, he was still just Dad. The man who taught him how to ride a bike, who grilled burgers in the backyard on Sunday afternoons, and who always reminded him that strength meant nothing if it was not guided by respect. The two officers who only moments ago had been questioning Jordan instinctively adjusted their stances. Their eyes flickered with recognition, not of his name yet, but of the kind of authority that could not be faked. Marcus looked first at his son, and his eyes softened just slightly, the tension in Jordan's small frame dissolving the moment. Their gazes met. That single look told Jordan everything he needed to hear. "You are safe now. I am here." Marcus turned his attention to the room. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He simply let the silence stretch until every eye was fixed on him. Then he asked the officers in a tone calm yet commanding, "Would someone explain to me why my son is standing here like he has done something wrong?" The woman in white, who had been so confident before, was the first to answer. Her voice, sharp and pointed, cut through the silence. "Because he was acting suspicious, I called it in. Look at him, he doesn't belong here. Do you expect me to believe a boy like that has any business in a place like this?" The words hung in the air, heavy and bitter. Jordan lowered his gaze, the sting of her voice cutting deep, but Marcus never looked away from her. He didn't glare, he didn't scowl, but his stillness carried more power than any shouted argument could. "My son came here with his own money, earned through his own hard work to buy a gift for his mother," Marcus said evenly. "And yet, because of your assumptions, he is standing here treated as if honesty is a crime." The officers exchanged glances, their unease growing. They knew now who stood in front of them. Chief Marcus Hayes was not just another father defending his child. He was a Navy SEAL chief, a leader whose name was whispered with respect in military circles, a man who had commanded operations that never reached the headlines but had shaped the safety of thousands. They had been trained to recognize authority, and Marcus radiated it effortlessly. The woman faltered for the first time. Her chin, once lifted high in pride, dipped just slightly. I was only trying to protect the store," she said, though even to her own ears the words sounded weak. Marcus finally moved closer, each step slow and deliberate, not threatening but impossibly steady. He stopped just a few feet away from her. "Do you know what protection really means?" he asked quietly. "It means standing up for what is right. It means seeing people for who they are, not who you assume them to be. My son deserves the same respect you would give any other customer in this shop. You saw only what you wanted to see. That isn't protection, that's prejudice." The woman's lips parted, but no words came. Her confidence had crumbled. She could not meet his eyes. Marcus turned away from her and focused on Jordan again. He placed a hand gently on his son's shoulder, grounding him. "Son, did you speak with respect?" he asked softly. Jordan nodded. "Yes, Dad. I tried to stay calm, like you always say." A small smile tugged at the corners of Marcus's mouth. "Good. That's what matters. Respect is stronger than anger. You remembered." The clerk stepped forward then, eager to support the boy. "Chief Hayes, your son did everything right. He was polite. He explained what he wanted, and he even showed me his savings. I've seen plenty of troublemakers in my years here, and he is not one of them. He was genuine from the moment he walked in." Marcus nodded his thanks, his hand still steady on Jordan's shoulder. Then he turned to the officers. They shifted nervously, but he didn't make them squirm. His tone was controlled, professional. "Gentlemen, there is no crime here. There is only a lesson. I trust you can see that now." "Yes, Chief," one of them replied quickly. "We'll mark this as resolved. No issue." The other nodded in agreement, both men stepping back with quiet deference. The whispers among the customers grew louder. Some people recognized the name now. They whispered stories they had heard about the Navy SEAL chief, about the missions he had led, about the kind of man he was. And here he stood, not on a battlefield but in a jewelry shop, defending his son with the same steady courage he carried everywhere. The woman shifted uncomfortably, her pride replaced with shame. For the first time she realized how deeply wrong she had been. She had judged a boy not by his actions but by her assumptions. And those assumptions had crumbled under the weight of truth. Marcus didn't humiliate her. He didn't need to. His words had already left their mark. Instead, he turned once again to his son. You came here for a reason, he said gently. Let's not forget it. What necklace did you choose? Jordan blinked, almost startled that the moment had shifted back to what he had wanted all along. He pointed to the delicate silver heart on the velvet tray, his eyes lighting up again. That one, Dad. It's for Mom. The clerk smiled warmly, lifting the necklace and placing it into a small box lined with satin. Jordan pulled out his envelope of savings, his hands no longer shaking but steady with pride. He placed the money on the counter, every crumpled bill, a symbol of his effort, every coin proof of his determination. The clerk counted it carefully, nodded, and slid the box across to him. Jordan picked it up slowly, holding it as if it were the most valuable treasure in the world. To him, it was. Not because of its price, but because of what it represented: love, gratitude, and the fulfillment of a promise he had made to himself months ago. Marcus looked at his son with quiet pride. Well done, he said simply. Those two words meant more to Jordan than any applause ever could. As they turned to leave, the woman lowered her gaze, shame painted across her face. She wanted to speak, to apologize, but the words caught in her throat. Maybe one day she would find the courage to admit her mistake, but in that moment, her silence was louder than any excuse could be. The bell above the door chimed softly as Marcus and Jordan stepped back into the sunlight. The city moved on around them, unaware of the lesson that had just unfolded inside the small jewelry shop. But for Jordan, it was a moment he would never forget. He had faced judgment. He had stood his ground with respect. And he had watched his father turn a painful experience into a lesson about truth and dignity. As they walked side by side down the street, Marcus rested his hand on Jordan's shoulder. Remember this day, he said quietly. Not because of what was said about you, but because of how you chose to respond. You can't control other people's assumptions, but you can control your own actions. That's where real strength lies. Jordan nodded, clutching the small box tighter. The lesson sank deep into his heart. He realized then that true authority wasn't about loudness or anger. It was about calmness, about standing tall in truth, about letting respect do the talking when everything else seemed unfair. The boy looked up at his father with admiration, his chest swelling with pride. To the world, Marcus Hayes was a Navy SEAL chief. To Jordan, he was a hero in the truest sense, not because of medals or titles, but because he had shown him how to face the world with dignity, no matter how unfair it seemed. And as the sunlight bathed them in gold, Jordan knew that this was not just his father's lesson. It was now his own. The small jewelry box rested in Jordan's hands like a fragile secret, the silver heart inside glowing softly against the satin lining. He held it close as if it might slip away if he didn't grip it tightly enough. Around him, the shop was still quiet, the echo of what had just happened hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. Customers shifted, some looking guilty for not having spoken up earlier, others nodding silently in respect for what they had just witnessed. The woman in white stood stiff near the counter, her face pale now, her arms no longer crossed with pride but hanging awkwardly by her sides. She had been so certain, so convinced of her own judgment, and now she was face to face with a reality that humbled her. Marcus placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder, his calm voice filling the room. You did well, son. You stood tall. You kept your respect. That is the only thing no one can take from you. He said it not for the crowd, not for the officers who were still lingering, but for Jordan alone. The boy nodded, feeling the words settle deep inside him, like a promise he was meant to carry forward in life. The two officers cleared their throats, one of them stepping forward, his voice careful, respectful. Chief Hayes, sir, it's clear. There's been no wrongdoing here. We'll report this as a misunderstanding. He hesitated for a moment, then added, Your son handled himself better than many grown men we've met. You must be proud. Marcus's expression softened, though his voice stayed even. Proud doesn't even begin to cover it. He glanced at Jordan, who straightened his back unconsciously, feeling taller beneath his father's gaze. The woman in white finally tried to speak, her voice breaking slightly. I didn't mean—" The words sounded hollow, each syllable carrying less conviction than the last. She wanted to defend herself, to stitch together a justification for what she had done, but the truth had stripped her excuses bare. She looked around the shop for support, but no one nodded. No one came to her defense. The silence itself was her answer. Marcus looked at her, not with anger but with the kind of disappointment that weighed heavier than fury ever could. "What you meant is less important than what you chose to do," he said calmly. "You chose suspicion when you could have chosen patience. You chose judgment when you could have chosen understanding. And the lesson here is simple. Your choices define you more than your intentions." The words landed like stones. She lowered her eyes, unable to meet his gaze. Her once confident posture now seemed small, fragile, as if she herself had become the one on trial. Marcus turned back to his son. "Come on, Jordan. Let's give your mother her gift." His voice shifted back to warmth, pulling his son out of the heaviness of the moment. But before they could leave, the clerk, who had watched everything unfold, leaned forward. His voice was quiet but filled with sincerity. "Chief Hayes, young man, thank you for reminding everyone here of what respect truly looks like. Today, this shop witnessed something far more valuable than jewelry." Jordan looked up at the clerk, a shy smile tugging at his lips. He didn't quite know how to respond, but he gave a small nod, clutching the box a little tighter. To him, it wasn't about teaching a lesson. It was about love, about honoring his mother, and about proving to himself that hard work mattered. But hearing those words filled him with a new kind of pride. Maybe what had happened here could help others too. The officers quietly left, their respect for Marcus and his son clear in the way they nodded before stepping out. The customers slowly returned to browsing, though their hushed conversations revealed that the moment would linger long after Marcus and Jordan had gone. The woman in white finally slipped out quietly, her steps quick, her eyes low. Shame trailed her like a shadow she could not outrun. Perhaps she would reflect, perhaps she would change, but in that moment her silence was the only apology she could offer. Marcus and Jordan stepped out into the daylight, the city buzzing with its usual rhythm as though nothing extraordinary had just occurred. Yet for Jordan, the air felt lighter, freer. He looked at his father and then at the box in his hands. He realized something profound. This gift was more than jewelry. It was proof of resilience. Proof that even when people doubted him, he could rise above it. Proof that the values his father had drilled into him were not just words but tools he could carry through life. As they walked together, Marcus broke the silence. "Son, you'll face moments like this again. People will judge before they understand. They'll assume before they ask. But never forget, their assumptions don't define you. Your actions do. Always let your truth speak louder than their doubt." Jordan nodded slowly, the words embedding themselves into his memory. "I understand, Dad." Marcus smiled faintly. "Good. Because strength isn't about being the loudest in the room. It's about being the calmest. That's what makes people listen." They walked in silence for a while, the noise of the city swirling around them. Cars honked, vendors shouted, people hurried along the sidewalks, all unaware that a quiet lesson in dignity had just been written inside a small jewelry shop. Jordan held the box close, feeling its weight not as a burden but as a reminder of what he had accomplished, not just in buying the gift, but in how he had carried himself when tested. That night, when his mother returned home from her shift at the hospital, tired yet smiling as she always did, Jordan presented her with the box. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, her eyes widening at the delicate silver heart resting inside. For a moment she was speechless, then tears welled in her eyes. "Jordan, how?" she whispered. "I worked for it, Mom," Jordan said softly. "Every dollar. I wanted you to have something special, something that shows how much I appreciate you." She pulled him into a tight embrace, her tears falling onto his shoulder. "You're the best gift I could ever ask for," she said through her sobs. Marcus stood nearby, watching quietly, pride swelling in his chest. He didn't need to say anything. The sight of his son standing taller than ever before, his wife, glowing with gratitude, was more than enough. And for Jordan, that moment was the true reward. Not the necklace, not the applause of strangers, but the look on his mother's face and the lesson his father had reminded him of. That respect and truth would always carry him further than judgment ever could. What happened in the jewelry shop would spread, whispered by those who had been there, maybe shared online by someone who couldn't stop thinking about it. Some would take it as a story of prejudice, others as a story of respect. But for Jordan, it was simply the story of how one moment tested him and how, with his father by his side, he had passed that test with dignity. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. Life would throw many more tests his way. But now he also knew something else. He was ready. The evening sky was brushed with shades of orange and purple as Marcus and Jordan walked home side by side, the quiet rhythm of their steps matching the calm that had finally settled between them. The little jewelry box was still in Jordan's hands, its weight feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because he had finally bought the gift he had dreamed of, heavier because of everything that had unfolded in the shop that afternoon. He kept glancing at his father, trying to read the silence in his face, but Marcus walked with the same steady calmness he always carried, his eyes fixed ahead, as though the entire world was just another path to be navigated with discipline and respect. For Jordan, the day had been overwhelming. He had started it with hope, excited to finally give his mother something special. Then it had turned bitter when suspicion fell on him like a shadow he couldn't escape. And then, when his father had walked in, everything had shifted again, teaching him that even in moments of unfairness, dignity was the strongest weapon. As they turned into their neighborhood, Jordan finally spoke. "Dad, were you angry?" His voice was soft, uncertain. Marcus looked down at him, his eyes kind. "I was disappointed, son, not at you, never at you. I was disappointed at how quickly people choose to judge without knowing the truth. Anger comes and goes, but disappointment teaches us something. It reminds us why we must always choose better." Jordan nodded slowly, absorbing the words. He wanted to ask more, but something about his father's steady tone made him fall silent again. They passed by neighbors who waved warmly, and Marcus greeted each one with a nod or a small smile, as if to remind his son that respect wasn't just something to hold on to in a jewelry shop. It was something to practice everywhere, in every moment. When they reached home, Jordan's little sister ran out the door, squealing in excitement. "Mom's almost home!" she shouted. Jordan smiled for the first time in hours, crouching down to hug her tightly, the jewelry box pressed carefully against his chest. Inside the house, the kitchen smelled faintly of spices, and the table was set with simple dishes waiting to be shared. Marcus moved to the window, his eyes scanning the street, a habit he couldn't shake from years of service, while Jordan paced the room, anxious and excited for the moment his mother would see the gift. When she finally walked through the door, weary from her hospital shift yet glowing with the smile she always carried for her children, Jordan's heart nearly burst. He stepped forward quickly, holding out the little box with trembling hands. "Happy birthday, Mom," he whispered. She blinked in surprise, her tiredness forgotten in an instant. Her fingers brushed the ribbon before untying it carefully, as though she knew something precious lay inside. When the lid opened, and the silver heart sparkled in the fading light, her breath caught. "Jordan," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "How did you—" "I saved for it," he said proudly, his voice stronger now. "Every dollar. I worked for it. I wanted you to have something beautiful." Tears filled her eyes as she pulled him into a long embrace, her arms shaking with the depth of her love. "You are the best gift I could ever receive," she said softly against his ear. His sister clapped with excitement, and Marcus watched, quietly from across the room, his chest swelling with pride. He had fought in deserts and oceans, led missions that had tested every ounce of his strength, but nothing in the world compared to seeing his son stand tall in his own truth. Later, That night, when the house grew quiet and the children were asleep, Marcus sat at the table with his wife. She wore the necklace proudly, her fingers brushing it every so often as if to remind herself it was real. "He's becoming more like you every day," she said, her eyes meeting his. Marcus shook his head gently. "Not like me. Better. He's learning earlier what took me years to understand, that real strength isn't in fists or medals, it's in dignity. It's in choosing respect even when others don't give it to you." She reached across the table, taking his hand. "You taught him that." Marcus smiled faintly, but his eyes grew thoughtful. "Maybe, but he taught it back to me today too." Watching him stand there, frightened but calm, telling the truth even when no one believed him. It reminded me that respect is not just a lesson to give, it's one we must keep practicing ourselves. The next morning, word of what had happened in the jewelry shop began to spread quietly through the community. Someone who had been there had told the story at work, another shared it at dinner, and soon neighbors were whispering about the boy who had been judged unfairly and the father who had stepped in with calm authority. By the end of the week, it reached the local paper. A short column told the story not as a tale of anger, but as a lesson in respect and dignity. Jordan felt embarrassed at first, seeing people point him out on the street with admiration. But Marcus reminded him gently, "This isn't about attention, son. It's about impact. If people learn something from what happened, then it was worth it." At school, some kids asked Jordan if the story was true. He nodded, not boasting, just confirming. "Yeah, but the real part wasn't about my dad being a Navy SEAL. The real part was learning to stay calm, to stand tall. That's what mattered." His words surprised even himself, but he realized they were true. The necklace was for his mother, but the lesson was for him. The woman in white, meanwhile, carried her own burden. For days she avoided the jewelry shop, the memory of Marcus's quiet words echoing in her mind. She had not expected to be humbled so deeply. Slowly, she began to see that her assumptions had been a mirror reflecting her own prejudice back at her. And though pride made it hard, she knew she would have to change. One Sunday, weeks later, Jordan and his family walked into church, his mother's silver heart necklace catching the light. The congregation smiled warmly at them, and Marcus's commanding yet gentle presence filled the space the way it always did. After the service, the woman in white approached hesitantly, her steps slow, her face filled with something Jordan hadn't seen before: remorse. She bent slightly toward him, her voice soft. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what I did, for how I judged. I was wrong." Jordan looked up at his father, who gave him a small nod. Then he looked back at the woman, his voice steady but kind. "I forgive you." Those 3 words carried more power than anger ever could. The woman's eyes watered, and she nodded, whispering a thank you before stepping away. Marcus placed a hand on his son's shoulder again, his pride unspoken but clear. That night, as the family gathered at the dinner table, Marcus raised his glass of water. "To respect," he said simply. "To remembering that it costs nothing but changes everything." His wife smiled, his daughter giggled, and Jordan lifted his glass too, the words etching themselves into his heart. For Marcus, the lesson had been proven once more. That authority was not about uniform or rank, but about example. For Jordan, it was the beginning of a lifelong understanding that he could walk into any room, face any assumption, and as long as he carried himself with dignity, he would always walk out taller than before. And in that simple home, filled with love, laughter, and a silver heart shining softly at his mother's neck, the lesson in respect lived on, not as a story to be told once, but as a legacy to be carried forward forever. The days that followed carried the rhythm of ordinary life, but for Jordan everything seemed sharper, more meaningful, as if the world had turned slightly and revealed a new angle. He still woke up early for school, still played basketball with friends in the neighborhood, still helped his sister with homework. But something inside him had changed. The experience in the jewelry shop had carved a quiet strength into his heart, a reminder that his worth was not tied to the way others saw him, but to the truth he carried within himself. Every time his mother wore the silver heart necklace, it glimmered like proof that love and hard work could overcome doubt. And every time Marcus's steady hand rested on his shoulder, it felt like a torch being passed from one generation to the next. The story of what had happened did not stay contained within the walls of the shop. It rippled outward like circles in a pond, first through the people who had witnessed it, then through their families and friends, and finally into the wider community. It was not retold as a story of confrontation, but as a story of revelation, of a father and son standing quietly against judgment with nothing more than calm truth. Teachers mentioned it at school. Neighbors spoke about it at their dinner tables, and even strangers greeted Marcus on the street with newfound respect, though he never sought it. For him, it had never been about recognition. It had been about teaching his son that dignity is not situational. It must live in every action, every word, every choice. Jordan, meanwhile, noticed how people looked at him differently. Some classmates whispered that his dad was a Navy SEAL chief, their eyes wide with awe, but Jordan always corrected them gently. "That's not the important part," he said. "The important part is how he handled it. He didn't yell. He didn't fight. He just told the truth and made people listen." His words carried weight because they came from someone who had lived the moment. Other kids began asking him questions about how to handle unfairness, and for the first time, Jordan felt like he wasn't just a boy learning lessons. He was also someone who could pass them on. The woman in white had disappeared from their lives at first, too ashamed to face the family she had wronged. But shame, when carried long enough, begins to turn into reflection, and reflection often leads to change. Weeks later, she appeared at the hospital where Jordan's mother worked. She waited by the front desk, clutching a small envelope in her hands until she saw the nurse in the silver heart necklace walking down the hall. With trembling hands, she stepped forward. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I judged your son unfairly. I judged without knowing. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to tell you I was wrong." Jordan's mother, tired from a long shift yet glowing with the same warmth that had carried her through years of caring for others, looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "We all make mistakes," she said gently. "What matters is what we do after them." She didn't take the envelope the woman offered, money she thought might make amends, but she accepted the apology with grace, teaching the woman that some wounds are healed not by payment but by humility. That night when she told Marcus and Jordan about the encounter, Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "People can change," he said simply. "But forgiveness is not about them. It's about us choosing not to carry the weight of their mistake." Jordan listened carefully, realizing once more that his father's strength was not in battles fought with weapons, but in lessons carried in silence. Months passed, and the necklace became more than just a gift. It became a symbol within their family, a story retold during dinners and gatherings, a reminder that truth had been tested and had endured. On Jordan's mother's days off, she would often touch the pendant and smile at her son, her eyes filled with pride. His sister would brag at school that her brother had bought their mom real jewelry with his own money, and though Jordan would blush, he secretly cherished the recognition. It wasn't the necklace itself that mattered most to him. It was the journey behind it, the lawns mowed under the hot sun, the cars washed until his hands ached, the fear he had felt under suspicion, and the strength he had found when his father walked through the door. Marcus continued to remind him that life would offer many more tests. One evening, while they sat on the porch watching the sky fade into dusk, Marcus spoke quietly. "Respect is like a seed, Jordan. It doesn't grow in the easy times. It grows when the soil is rough, when the rain is heavy, when the sun burns. You proved yourself in that shop, not by buying a necklace, but by holding your dignity when it was hardest, remember that." Jordan nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He knew his father was right. That day in the shop had planted something inside him, something that would guide him long after the memory of the woman in white had faded. Eventually, the story reached beyond their community. A local journalist wrote about it, framing it as a reminder of the dangers of assumptions and the power of calm authority. The article spread online, and soon people across the country were reading about the young boy who had saved for his mother's gift and the Navy SEAL chief who had defended him with quiet dignity. Comments poured in, some angry about the prejudice, but most inspired by the example of respect. For Jordan, it was overwhelming, but Marcus reminded him once more, impact is never about how many people see it. It's about how many people learn from it. On his mother's next birthday a year later, Jordan gave her another small gift, a framed photograph of their family, smiling together, the necklace glowing softly against her skin. On the back, he wrote a simple message, respect first, always. His mother cried again. Marcus smiled quietly and his sister cheered. That's our family motto now, and so it became. In every choice, every word, every action, Jordan carried it with him. He carried it when teachers were unfair, when classmates teased, when strangers looked at him with doubt. He carried it when he helped neighbors, when he stood up for his sister, when he dreamed of the future. He carried it because it was not just his father's lesson anymore. It was his own. The woman in white, too, carried something forward. Though she was not part of their lives, she began volunteering at a community center, quietly trying to make up for the judgment she had once shown. Her actions were small, but they were steady, and though she never asked for recognition, those who saw her noticed the change. The story had transformed her as much as it had transformed the boy she had once doubted, and so, in the end, what had started as a painful afternoon in a jewelry shop became something larger than any of them could have predicted. It became a story not of shame but of growth, not of anger but of respect, not of division but of reflection. Jordan learned that assumptions could wound, but truth could heal. Marcus reminded the world that authority was best shown in calm strength. His mother discovered that her son had inherited more than just his father's features. He had inherited his integrity. And even the woman in white learned that mistakes could become turning points if met with humility. Years later, when Jordan grew older and faced challenges of his own, he would often think back to that day. He would remember the sting of being judged, the relief of seeing his father walk in, the pride of placing his hard-earned money on the counter, and the tears in his mother's eyes when she opened the necklace, and each time he remembered he would stand a little taller, speak a little calmer, and carry himself with the respect that had been planted in him long ago. Because in the end, the greatest gift that came out of that day was not the necklace. It was the lesson that respect, once chosen, becomes a shield that no judgment can pierce. And that was a treasure far greater than anything behind glass in a jewelry shop.